This program contains subject matter related to mental health and suicide. If you or anyone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 for free, 24/7, to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Hello and welcome to Elevating Voices, a roundtable discussion series by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, where we bring together members from diverse communities to uncover the unique mental health challenges they face and discuss ways to solve them. I'm your host, Vic Armstrong. It can be challenging for many of us to talk about our mental health, but men in particular are less likely to report mental health issues and to seek treatment. So how can we encourage men to speak up about mental health challenges? Well, today, I'm joined by a group of men who are leading by example. Before we start the conversation, I want to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Dan, let's start with you.
Hey, I'm Dan Egan. I work as Assistant Director of Facilities at a satellite campus of the University of Albany up here in Albany, New York.
Thank you. Tony.
Yes, Tony Gaddy, President and CEO of Upstate New York Black Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Black Chamber's affiliate for here in New York.
Welcome, sir. And Eh Doji.
My name is Eh Doji. I was a student that just graduated. I'm with SNS Consulting, consulting group, and I also work at Apple.
Well, congratulations on your graduation.
Yes, congrats.
Thank you.
So I guess the first question I would ask you is, what did mental health conversations look like for each of you when you were growing up? What kind of cultural or familial or societal factors do you think impact how men talk about mental health, and particularly in the community that you grew up in? Tony, I want to start with you. What did mental health conversations look like for you as you were growing up?
It's going to be a really short answer, but there weren't any. There weren't any. I was raised in a time when it was almost the antithesis of any such conversation, where all the cliches that we grow up kind of having ingrained in us, man up, big boys don't cry, those type of things. Those are more of the conversations that I'm familiar with growing up. Conversations around mental health, or even admitting any sense of struggle, or almost taboo.
Yeah. I would imagine you got the what happens in this house stays in this house as well.
Oh, what happened in my house definitely stayed in my house.
Yeah.
And, probably to the detriment of all of us.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, that when we say that, it can bring back fond childhood memories, but at the same time, what happens in this house stays in this house is okay if you live in a safe house. But for individuals who don't grow up in safe environments where there may be domestic violence or addiction or other things happening, and you're not permitted to talk about those things, that can be extremely, extremely traumatic for people. Dan, how about you? What was the conversation like for you growing up?
Wow, very similar to Tony. It just wasn't something that was talked about. When I was 19 and a freshman in college, I lost my dad to suicide. And the year before, he had actually been, treated inpatient, and it still wasn't something we talked about in the family. And after he died, because him and my mom split up when I was very young, there was really no discussion about it, even that like the impact, et cetera.
And you again were how old at the time?
I was 19 when I lost him to suicide. And up at college, easy enough to compartmentalize those worlds and put on that strong face that you're expected to do and pretend everything's okay.
But even in college, where you were surrounded by your peers, were you able to talk to them about it, or still
not really? I know that when it happened, I had been home, but they had a meeting before I came back to school, and I got this amazing card that I still have to this day from everybody telling me they were there for me. That if I needed anything to reach out, and I just didn't know how to reach out, and they really weren't comfortable checking in. So it kind of just went unsaid.
Well, I'm sorry for the loss of your father, and I appreciate your willingness to talk about it and your vulnerability in sharing with us here today about it. So thank you for that. Eh Doji. What was it like for you?
So when you say growing up, right? Since I am younger, I feel like I'm still growing up. So when talking about growing up, let's go. Yeah.
You know, you don't have to rub it in that you're younger, right?
sorry, but yeah, it's a bit different. So back when I was younger, there wasn't any talks about mental health. We didn't really care about it. There's been a shift, I would say, when I was in high school. It was almost drastic. Mental health wasn't an issue until when I was in like high school, in the middle of my high school career, where there just was like a huge impact on mental health. And from then on, I would say after high school to college, that's when it was more focused on mental health. But at the same time, even though there was, a focus on that, if we're being really honest about me talking about it, even though there were importance on it, I didn't. Yeah. Just because of, how I was raised, I didn't, even though there was. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say there was a change like from high school to college, are you saying there was just a change like in society's willingness to talk about it, not something that was specific to you?
Mm-hmm. I noticed that. So I would say yes, because until, or maybe I just grew up, I don't know, but until I was in the middle of my high school, of course, you see some posters sometimes about mental health, your school tries to say a few things about it, but until I would say a few years back, it was just like, oh, mandatory. It was just like, okay, talk about it. There's mental health is an issue. It wasn't really anything past that. Oh, there's mental health is an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think we're seeing more of a willingness now to talk about it than we have seen in the past. So what reactions and Eh Doji, we'll stay with you for a minute. So today, with there having been this little bit more of awareness about mental health challenges, more willingness to talk about it. So what reactions do you get today if you bring up mental health or mental illness to your friends and family? Is it received differently?
I would say definitely, because now if we were to talk about this issue back when the beginning of high school, nobody would care, or like not nobody would care. There wouldn't be as much of a importance to it. But now, ever since a few years ago, since everybody's talking about mental health, and then during COVID, after seeing the effects of it, I would say, right, there's definitely been more spaces, more I would say spaces, more opportunities to talk about it. And if you were to talk about it, instead of being shut down, especially if, for being, I would say, a man, right? You wouldn't get shut down anymore. That opinion has shifted.
Yeah. I agree with that. Tony, how about from your perspective, if you were to broach the subject of mental health today with your friends and family, is it different now than it was when you were growing up?
Absolutely. I think, there's much more space created. It's actually encouraged. I think there's been more of an acknowledgement that mental health is a human condition. It's not gender specific. It's not culturally specific. Anyone and everyone should be mindful of their mental health. So, we encourage that conversation. It's one of the reasons that led to us starting our brotherhood group called Brotherhood United. Was kind of sparked by my own personal struggles and feeling a need to create a safe space for, brothers of all ages. Dan and Doji are part of BU. And it was really designed at a moment in time where I needed something. And I met a couple other, men who also seemed to be searching for a similar space. And that was, we launched BU in March, and we're 8 months in, and the group is growing. The connections are building, and it's really become, as much as I enjoy the work I do with Black Chambers, I feel like this Brothers United thing is, more impactful, but in a different way, because I feel like it's not only been helpful to me, but I also feel like it's been helpful, to other men as well. So much more safe, much more aware. And I think women especially have acknowledged the work we're doing. And then I think when we first met, I made a point to acknowledge that a lot of the work we do or haven't done, the repercussions have fallen on the women in our community to, in many ways, carry us. And so Brothers United, while also inspired by men wanting to do better for themselves and each other, a lot of it is rooted in our responsibilities and our accountabilities for our role in our community.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're doing this with Brothers United, because we often talk about the fact that we need more safe spaces for men to talk about mental health challenges, and you all have created that because you've brought together men who are wanting to have this conversation, men who are open to having this conversation, and so that's got to be helpful. The other thing I love about what you've done is clearly just looking at the three of you, it's a very diverse group. And so oftentimes, we think about the challenges we face around stigma, and it's easy to think about it in terms of, there's stigma in the Black community, there's stigma in the AAPI community, there's stigma in all communities, but there are also things that we share in common as men that transcend race and ethnicity, but there are things about the role of men and how men are perceived and how men are socialized around this topic of mental health that seems to transcend race and ethnicity. So I commend you all on what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Dan, you are heavily involved with AFSP. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you became involved with AFSP, and then how has your work with our organization changed how you think about mental health and your ability to influence in this mental health space?
Yeah, Vic, I really didn't talk about my dad's loss or anything that was going on with me for about probably close to a decade and a half. And then I was working, I won't name the place I was working, but it was a very stressful job, and the company was in transition in the middle of merging with another company, and went through this period of what I thought were heart attacks. I really thought, I was having heart palpitations, and ultimately after a bunch of visits to the emergency room, a bunch of doctor's visits, a lot of cardiology testing, turned out it was anxiety and panic attacks. So at that point, kind of realized I had to talk to a professional, went to a couple of therapists that didn't work out well, found somebody that I really could talk to and be comfortable with, and kind of reached a point after a couple of years of that where I really thought that we could help people travel an easier road, especially those who've lost a loved one to suicide, and really make it less isolating for them and help them, get through it and be able to talk about it and be able to be around other people. So I think it's really the one thing you said. I think the stigma affects everybody almost. There's no community, I think, that's really great at talking about mental health. We've gotten a lot better over the years, and I think Brothers United is a great example of trying to do that and really trying to break the cycle. But we still have a long way to go, and just keep working at it. And I think it's so important. It makes such a difference. For those of us who have been through a loss and also been through a struggle, it helps make meaning out of that journey. I can take the worst day of my life and turn it into something that helps other people. Kind of takes a little bit of the sting out of it.
Yeah. And you currently chair the Loss and Healing Council for AFSP?
I do. Blessed to be able to do that work, work with some absolutely amazing individuals and get to really share and celebrate the people we've lost to suicide and remember them for how they lived, not how they died.
Tell us a little bit more about what do you do? What does the Loss and Healing Council do? And, how do you impact the lives of people who have experienced loss?
So we're really trying to just make that journey easier, less isolating. We have specific programs, our Healing Conversations program, which is a one-on-one peer-to-peer meeting where you can talk to someone who's shared a similar loss. We have a broad range of volunteers, so we really try to match what the requester is looking for. Sometimes you want to talk to someone who shares the same loss, or maybe someone who was the same age when they had their loss. So really being able to make those connections, and kind of bridge the gap between that, getting to resources and getting to help sooner, and understanding that it's okay to still say their name. We also have a programs committee that just rolled out an amazing program that I couldn't be more proud and honored to be part of, called Caring Communities, which is really teaching communities how to talk to loss survivors and what you can say that's helpful and what you can say that's not always helpful, right? I think in my lifetime, people have come up to me a bunch of times about my dad and told me he had so much to live for, but never said that about anybody else I know who died from cancer or, lost my grandmother just to another disease. And it's really teaching people that, what's the right thing to say and what to do. Yeah. And then having things like our long-term loss survivor summit, where we can get folks together and let them know this is a lifetime journey. It's not something you get over. It doesn't get easier. You get stronger. And I always liken that to kind of like an athletic background, right? Where you have an injury, and if you don't do the work and do the PT, you're not going to heal the way you're supposed to. And I really did a disservice to myself in the long run, because early on I didn't put in that work, and it made my road a lot harder to come back and finally reach a place where I was comfortable talking about it.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how grateful we are for your willingness to share from your own lived experience. In your experience in working with the Loss and Healing Council, Dan, do you find that men cope with loss differently?
I definitely think so. There's some similarities, there's some differences. I think we still really struggle with the idea of crying in public. Yeah. When I was a young man, my grandmother was the first person who told me, "You're right, we lost the family dog." And she was like, "Oh, men don't cry. You have to be strong for everybody else." So I do think there's some differences in our grief, and just understanding that everybody's is going to look a little bit different. Yeah. At points for me, because I didn't express it, it really turned into anger and rage. And I think that's something that's more common with men, is, just stuffing that stuff down until it builds up. Yeah. 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 And again, I think having peers that you can talk to and share with, it makes a world of difference. So again, I commend you all on what you're doing to create space to have these conversations. Anthony, working in business and government, do you see many conversations about mental health in the spaces that you're in?
Very few. There've been more, not a lot, but there's been some recently, but it's still an additional layer, because in this sector, business and government, the element of needing to kind of portray a certain image of strength and leadership and, experience and expertise, I think what that sometimes creates is another mask that, is required to be worn once we enter into public, and where it's time for us to kind of suit up and put our armor on and go be, in my case, go out there and be Anthony Gaddy, chamber president and all that. But, before you leave the house to go perform, what kind of state of mind are you in is often determined by what's going on inside your four walls, physically as well as mentally. So I think as men, we are almost, unfortunately, programmed, improperly trained to acknowledge that source within us that allows us to be still human when we have to go out and do the work we do, especially, in business, where any sign of weakness will be taken advantage of. And I think, what that creates, and I'll speak for myself, is sometimes, there's a sense of a dual identity, if you will, where you have to, I'll just say I can be Anthony, but then I'm also Tony, and kind of the lines often get blurred. And depending on the state of mind you're in, the state of being you're in, it can often lead to a sense of almost what I kind of and others maybe refer to as imposter syndrome, where you really don't necessarily, sometimes at any given point, you don't even know who you are. And I'm speaking for myself. And so you kind of get locked into this performance mode where you have to always have an answer for everything and you have to be right all the time. And so there's these rules of engagement that are really not conducive to proper mental health without, being really diligent and mindful of, where you are and who you are.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of interesting points there, because what you're also talking about a little bit there is the intersection of mental health and business, the intersectionality also of being a man of color in that space, and actually, leading the Upstate New York Black Chamber of Commerce. That's a heavy lift. And then, as you say, you have these spaces where things intersect and where you're always expected to be on and to perform. So what kind of impact, Anthony, do you think reports of racism in the media have on mental health for Black men?
Oh, it's, sometimes I myself, it's difficult because, part of my work requires me to stay informed about what's going on in the political and economic landscape. And you almost kind of get sucked into these daily onslaughts of everything having to do with race, culture, ethnicity, diversity, and all those things kind of inform, the advocacy work we do. And so the need to unplug is difficult for me. It's been very challenging. It was more challenging in certain parts of the year. So every day, I have to kind of find a balance between the work I do and the person and I am, and also be mindful that as a Black man in this country, there's just a different component to the challenges. Not to diminish the challenges of any other culture or ethnicity, but the history of this country is such where, I understand my journey and the journey of ancestors that came before me. There's a lot of weight that comes with the work we do and the work I do and who we do it for. And, there are days and nights where sleep is a luxury, eating is a luxury. And, it's just the day to day. It's just day to day, being mindful.
It's again, it kind of brings me back to this thought of, there is power in having conversations with people that you have a shared experience with. And so, talking with other Black men who've had similar experiences, lived experience as your own is extremely helpful. But then also recognizing there are commonalities among men in general. And so you've got, that balance. And you can go and talk with other Black men about the things that are unique to the Black culture, but you've also got this network of men that you can talk to about the things that are common to all of us around mental health. So again, I commend you all for what you're doing. I'd like to maybe shift a little bit now to Eh Doji, as a representative of younger men in this conversation. We touched on this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit about, do you think your generation approaches mental health differently than your parents and your grandparents did?
My answer is yes. We approach it very differently, and I think it is for the better. There's always room to improve, but it is better because, for example, I feel like my parents don't even talk about how they feel, the mental health, any of that, much less my grandparents, right? However, I've noticed a shift for me personally too. I'm even now more willing to talk about my problems, and that's already a first step. Not only that, my friends sometimes, if they're going through something that's hard, they always reach out to me. And what I like to do as well is keep this up. So what I like to do is I work with younger kids, and if I'm able to get the chance, let them know, it's okay to talk about it. What your problem is, try to help them, let them know that it's okay to talk. The first step is even just talking about it. And since I was able to do that, I do feel a lot better. Where just a few years ago, if I had a problem, I wouldn't even think to talk about it. I would just keep it to myself. But now that I've grown older, I'm more willing to talk about it. And just even talking about it, my friends have helped me a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. You bring up a very good point too about having conversations with your friends and your friends being willing to reach out to you. There was a data put out by the CDC, it's probably been a couple of years ago now, but that 76% of young people said they were more likely to go to a peer when they were experiencing some type of mental health crisis than to go to a mental health professional. And so it makes sense that your peers would come to you if they're need to talk about something. But, part of the challenge is in making sure that those resources they're reaching out to have the right information. And so again, for someone like you who has taken upon yourself to try to understand these mental health challenges and to be willing to have these conversations and to work on your own mental well-being makes you a more credible resource for people who are probably going to reach out to you, and especially when they know that you are someone who is open to having the conversation. So I commend you for that as well. I do have a question for the larger group, and that is, do you think, or how do you think mental health messaging changes when it's directed at men? Is the messaging around mental health different when it's directed at men versus being directed at women?
Wow, it's a great question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it, when it's directed at men, really tries to emphasize that reaching out for help is a sign of strength, kind of overcoming that stigma that asking for help is a sign of weakness, really trying to, let them know that it's okay to ask a friend or see a mental health professional. I mean, that would be the one biggest thing I notice.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan, I think you make an excellent point there. I do think the messaging for men, it does seem to start with speaking to that perception of masculinity, which is always interesting. Tony, you have anything to add to that?
I can only just kind of reinforce, what Dan said, is that it's gotten better. And I don't think, I'll just speak for myself. A year ago, I would have probably run from having this conversation, let alone putting out some headphones and speaking about it in this forum. But again, to Dan's point, we in the Doji, we still have work to do to continue to create spaces and to widen spaces so that this conversation becomes just as normal as talking about the football scores on a Monday morning. We have to continue to be intentional about this, and that's the only way the message is going to get better. Sometimes we're so pop culture driven that anytime a celebrity or athlete or entertainer talks about it, it almost becomes like, oh, now it's safe to talk about it. But really, it's the day-to-day people that we see who are our heroes and who are the brave ones, on the front lines, being bold and yet still curious about what additional work we have to do for ourselves to become better men so that we can do better. So I'm optimistic. Forums like this continue to inspire and inspire me to continue putting in the work.
Yeah, it's also interesting to me because as we have these conversations, and I pointed out, in the conversation we're having here today, we have men representing different culture, different race, different ethnicity, different age groups. But again, it again kind of comes back to that intersectionality. None of us are any one thing. When I look at myself, as a Black man, I'm also someone who grew up in a very rural community. Population of my hometown is just a little over 3,000 people. I'm also someone who grew up in a faith-based community. My father was a pastor, and so I grew up, hearing messaging around faith. And you don't need a psychiatrist, psychologist. You need Jesus. You just need to pray more. And so all of those things impacted my perception of how mental health impacted me and my willingness to talk about it. What are some of the common, from you all, what are some of the common mental health challenges impacting your respective communities, however you define community? And Dan, let's start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, you've probably heard me say this before, but I think one of the root causes is we just don't give people the tools to deal with a mental health crisis until they have one. Mm-hmm. It turned out later in life, like I learned some breathing techniques that really help me manage anxiety when I'm stressed out. And those are things we could teach kids at a younger age, but we just don't do it. I don't know if it's this idea too of, men not showing that level of emotion or not showing that level of vulnerability, but really finding those ways to get tools into people's hands and let them know it's okay to use them.
Mm-hmm. Tony, any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the Black community in particular, I think the sense of, machismo, for lack of a better word, but really what it's rooted in, and as far as my experience and understanding, is that we have not dealt with the issues around trauma in our community and the lasting impact. We usually talk about the term generational wealth.
Right.
Well, what we don't talk about is generational health, and how those things get passed down as well. So if you take generations upon generations where there's, trauma untreated, well, that leads to a lack of trust. Mm-hmm. And so when you have no trust within your community, the results are indicative of what's going on in a lot of our communities in terms of the lack of respect for humanity, decency sometimes that just kind of permeates not our entire community, but let's be honest, we have issues and concerns that need to be addressed, and I think not dealing with the trauma component and just pushing that to the side or putting it on the shelf and plowing our way through it has been really detrimental. So some of the tools that Dan referenced that we have at our disposal, sometimes we're even reluctant to use those because those don't come across as masculine. So for me, it took forever to embrace yoga. That was one of the things that, I had kind of just ignored. Only women do yoga. And predominantly, yes, that's true. But, yoga has its own benefits. It's a different form of therapy in a way. So, there are resources and the tools at our disposal. We just have to kind of get over ourselves and our egos to embrace them.
Yeah, you bring up, trauma is such a big, it's a big topic. It's one that we don't have the time to get into completely today the way that I'd like to, but kind of what you speak to though is in a lot of communities and in the Black community in particular, we have normalized trauma. There are a lot of things that we have not even identified as trauma. And I have found personally that when I'm doing work and for example, I do a lot of work in faith-based organizations, and when I'm working with a lot of times with Black churches, we start off on kind of on the same page until we do get into some of the trauma, and you find out that there are leaders in the church, oftentimes the pastor hasn't dealt with their own trauma. And when they haven't dealt with their own trauma, then that means everything gets shut down because you've started now to get into a space where they're not comfortable. So yeah, that trauma is a big one, and being willing to deal with it, call it what it is. There's so much about, I think, things that have been socialized in a lot of communities that as we look back on now, we realize they were not healthy for us, and we don't know what to do with that. Like I look, for example, at, we hear people in the Black community and in other communities, but in the Black community in particular, I hear people talking almost lovingly about having to go out to the tree and pick their own switch, or getting hit with an extension cord when they were growing up, and things like that. And we don't realize that behavior wasn't healthy
at all.
But when we start to talk about that, it gets into, well, are you insulting my parents, my grandparents? They did the best they could with what they knew to do, but we now know that behavior is not healthy. But oftentimes it has resulted in trauma that people just don't want to deal with. So it's a big deal. Eh Doji, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. So for me, I'm in, I would say, a lot of different communities. So it's difficult to say, but obviously I'm Asian and I'm also an immigrant. So this is where it kind of gets difficult, because am I an immigrant first or am I Asian? Just because back where I was from, things are different than here, right?
Yeah.
I was from a refugee camp, and at that point, I've been in a refugee camp. There's no, organizations to help you with their mental health. There's no places you could just go in and say, I'm struggling with something. We're on like survival mode. So back then it's like we're on survival mode. Like, do we even have the luxury to talk about mental health? Obviously you would need it, but just being in that mode, it's a bit difficult. Now, after coming here, we have more resources. At the same time, just because you have more resources doesn't mean, everything's better now. You have more resources. It doesn't mean, your life will get better. And not only that, being in the Asian household, because of that survival mode, because of that mindset that carried over here, it still stayed. We don't talk about mental health. And not only that, now that I'm an immigrant, now that I'm here with all these resources, I have higher expectations of me. Pressure, a lot of pressure, strict household, all that. And because of that, you would think, I'm gonna have a lot of mental like difficulties. But even though there might be, we still don't talk about that. That's just how Asians are. Asians are, I would say, they're smart, they get the degree or whatever, they work, and then they become successful. Yeah. And that's just not true. And that mindset is so ingrained into like our community, where we don't have anything else other to talk about than, are you this and this here? How are you doing with your life? That's it. So yeah, definitely, we just don't talk about it in our communities, whether it be back then or here, and it's still ingrained.
And when you look at the uptick in discrimination and violence against members of the AAPI community that we've seen escalating over the past several years, you look at some of the challenges right now that the immigrant community is facing, that all has to take a toll on people in your community, which means this conversation we're having now about how we deal with our mental health, mental well-being, and how we build a sense of community where you have people that you can go to and talk to is all that much more important. So thank you so much for sharing that from your personal experience. And then Dan and Tony, both, you mentioned some what I would call self-care techniques. Like Dan, you mentioned breathing exercise and things that can help. We don't often think about men needing self-care. As a matter of fact, my T-shirt says men need self-care too. Can you talk about, from a personal perspective, what does self-care look like for you? For me, one of the things that I do every day, and it's part of my mental well-being routine, is I have to get up and go to the gym every day. It helps me with my because when I'm in the gym, if I'm lifting weights, I have to regulate my breathing. I have to be mindful of my body. It's a time that I can kind of shut everybody else out and just focus on, what I'm doing. And so that's a part of my self-care routine, is setting aside that time every day where I get up very early in the morning, I do my workout, I go to the gym, and that's kind of my time. But I'm curious from you guys, what does self-care look like for you? Tony, let's start with you.
I guess I implement a variety of things that I enjoy that kind of allow me to kind of regulate and be still. Yoga is a new practice. through something called Grounded Grooves that was started up here by Nikki Rogers and Lifted Vision. I play guitar, not well, but I enjoy playing guitar. I do go to the gym, not every day. I can't say I'm a fanatic like that, but I do that. I take walks. I go up on my rooftop, meditate, pray, read. So there's a variety of things that I like to incorporate into my overall well-being. Sometimes it's travel, sometimes it's just shopping, but just a mixture of things that in any given moment I find peace in. Sometimes it's cleaning the apartment. There's just a variety of things that I kind of go by how I feel in that moment, and that's what I'll gravitate towards to find some sense of serenity, I guess you could say.
Well, you live a long way from me, but Dan and Eh Doji, did you hear that Tony likes house cleaning? That's part of his self-care. So you may want to invite him over.
Yeah. I need to clean my room.
Yeah, you're free this Sunday. I've got some.
Dan, what does self-care look like for you?
Early in my professional career, I worked in an industry where, work was constantly calling me, constantly, you were on the go 24/7. And one part of it is really setting that aside. When I'm at work, I'm at work. When I'm not at work, kind of letting that all go, making sure, I have that time, that downtime from it to refresh and rebuild. Sometimes it's just shutting off all the screens, sitting down, reading a book, taking that time even just to sit outside. I also love exercising, but I've got some physical things that get in the way of it, unfortunately, these days, but trying to work through a lot of that. I think it's also important. And, just at the end of the day, I really try to take a few minutes, do those breathing exercises. I'm a big 4-7-8 guy with the breathing, and taking some time for gratitude, just really focusing on the positive moments of the day. As someone who's done customer service most of their life, it's so easy to focus on the people and the problems it caused during the day, but taking that time to think about all the positive things that happened and the good you did in the world.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. Eh Doji.
Self-care. Self-care for me would be a day of, I like shopping for colognes. I love colognes. So if I get a new cologne, that would make my whole day. I love colognes.
Oh, wow.
I love doing that. Yeah. Other than that, though, I like playing sports. As in high school, I played like 3 sports. So going to the gym, being active is something that helps me. Biking, seeing nature. I love camping too. If I could go camping or fishing, or swimming, that just brightens up my whole mood. I love doing that. It's getting colder now, so I probably won't be doing that for a while. But just being active, connecting with nature, just because where I'm from, I love doing that. That would just make me feel way better. But yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So, Dan, why is it important to have mental health conversations even when we're feeling fine?
I think it really just establishes that baseline with it. There's 2 things, right? Every time we can share our story, I think it gives permission to someone else to do the same. Even at Brotherhood United, I know Tony's seen a couple of times I've shared about losing my dad. One time we had another brother just right away share that he'd also lost his father to suicide at 19 and hadn't really talked about it. I think having those conversations with a professional at times is really important, just like when you get your physical, right? You're really trying to set that baseline so they know what you're like when you're going through something, and they know the levels and get to understand who you are as a person. I know telehealth and stuff are great too, but I'm a fidgeter person, so like my mental health professional knows that every now and then just got to check in and see what I'm doing with my hands if I'm nervous. Am I fidgeting down there, or am I just putting on that brave face? So really normalizing that it's something you need to take care of to keep it positive.
Very good. Thank you. Eh Doji, what advice would you give to a man who wants to seek mental health support? They feel like they may need mental health support, but they're just not sure where to start. What advice would you give them?
Best thing to do is there's a lot of organizations. There's a lot of resources available. But for me, like if we're being personal right now, and to see what would tell me, why not just tomorrow Saturday? I'll take him to BU Saturday. Why can't I just do that, right? So, of course, he can talk about it with me personally, right? But if I can, maybe get him to a place where the whole thing is just, that's a focus. So taking him to BU, actual, maybe like Dan said, some place where they gear towards that professionally would be an advice that would actually be good. Yeah.
One of the things too that's interesting is, and I think you said BU. Is that a
Brothers United? Yeah. It's a safe space for men.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know what? I was making in my mind BU was behavioral something or other, and I was trying to think, where's it? No. Like it was a behavioral health unit you were taking them to. I was like, why is he taking to an inpatient unit? So, but okay, so I'm glad I asked the question. But that's fantastic. So part of what you would do is you would take them to a place where there are like-minded people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
they can be around and because I think one of the things sometimes that we underestimate is the power in human connection and social connection, and knowing that we are not alone, and in being around other people who can help us to show us that we have value and self-worth. So I like that. And I think the other thing too that's important in what you said is, if someone comes to you and says, I'm ready, I want mental health support, but I don't know where to start, you stayed with them. Maybe I would take them, with me to this group tomorrow, or I talk to them about this. But I think to me, what's key in there is you did not say, well, I tell them to go find somebody to talk to. You made the connection with them. And I think that's one of the things that as men, we don't do enough of, because there's something about another brother who is hurting emotionally that makes us uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes as men, we want to push that person away, push that person aside. And I think part of it is probably because it reminds us that, well, sometimes I don't feel great either. Mm-hmm. But I love the fact that you talked about, what you would do personally to provide that connection for them. So that's fantastic. Anthony, what advice do you have for someone who wants to bring up a mental health conversation, maybe with a family member, with a loved one, but that loved one is reluctant to talk to them or share their feelings? What advice would you give to that person and say, I want to talk to my brother, I want to talk to my sister, my uncle, because I know they're struggling, but they're reluctant to tell me what's going on with them. What advice would you give to that person?
I'm still learning that aspect of this journey through my own experience. I can only offer to them that I am here to listen as often and as long or as short as needed. I would encourage people and them to be brave, because the fear of being vulnerable is in its own self a prison. And I think sometimes, especially with men, we are more comfortable, unfortunately, hiding behind walls instead of breaking them down. Yeah. So I would encourage, as I do with, BU, and I put myself out there with BU at any given moment, as does Dan and then Doji as well. It's not the shame is in not asking for help. Yeah. But we're not programmed. So we almost have to unlearn what we've been taught as men. Because what that does is that just forces more of that raising of a man to our women or our significant others in our lives. And, we're not their sons. We're supposed to be their grown men. But if we're unable to address our own vulnerabilities, then that's just adding on one more thing for someone else to do. And that's not what we're here to do.
Yeah, agree. And this is it's a learning journey for all of us. So none of us have all the answers, but just that willingness to listen. I think we underestimate the power of just being willing to say to someone, I may not completely understand your pain, but I acknowledge that your pain is real.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm willing to, to sit here with you. I think there's a lot of power in it. I would also, remind people too that on our AFSP website, we have resources. That Talk Away the Dark campaign. We have that information, those connections on our website. So there are pointers and tools on the AFSP website. You go to afsp.org. You can find resources for how to start a conversation, how to talk to someone if you suspect that someone is struggling. We have tips on there for if you're trying to get someone to go to counseling and they're hesitant about going, how do you talk to them about that? So there are resources out there, but it starts with, just from where you started, Tony, it starts with being willing to listen, acknowledge that person's pain.
If I could add one thing, please, it's real short story. My younger cousin, doctor, called me the other day asking for some, business guidance, and that's family, so that's a no-brainer. At the end of the call, he said to me, "Let me know if there's anything I can do for you." And I said, "Well, I'm looking for a therapist." And today he sent me the contact information for a therapist who turns out to be a Black man. So the next step is on me to be brave and reaching out and making that call to take that next step. So I just wanted to share that as well. It's very important.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad. Thank you for sharing that. That is very important. And you kind of touch on this next question I want to ask. So I want to stay with you for a minute, Anthony. And the question I want to put to all three of you is, what gives you each of you hope about about how the conversation around men's health is changing, men's mental health is changing?
For me, it's my own honesty. Finally, I'm older now, so I, woulda, shoulda, coulda. I'm optimistic that everything that has brought me to this point will be a catalyst and fuel to continue having these conversations, to continue welcoming brothers to BU, to continue to evolve and grow better as a man, especially a Black man in my community, and the work I do especially. Inspired by the younger generation coming up that has a sense of fearlessness within them, inspired by the cultural dynamic of the shared experience that we all have, and in terms of identifying the things that are common to our foundation, or sometimes lack thereof, in terms of our foundation. I'm optimistic that as much work as there is to still be done, that there are men and brothers such as ourselves here who, no matter what stage of this journey we're in, whether it's career or just a personal journey, I'm inspired that we can continue to have dialogue like this. So I thank all of you for this time today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Eh Doji, same question. What gives you hope about how the conversation around men's mental health is changing?
What gives me hope is, at least in my generation, the willingness for the others to help. Like I said, for example, earlier today, just was going through something, texting the group chat, didn't think much of it, right? But I actually got a lot of my friends to reach out to me to ask me, is everything okay? Even gave me some, some tips of like the situation that's going on, and just realizing like, wow, these guys actually do care, are trying to help. It's just way different because these same people, if I were to ask them this question a year ago, would be different. I'm like, hold on, they've changed, and like this is different than what they would have said a year ago. So that itself, it gave me hope. I'm like, okay, now that it was almost a green light for me to like, okay, I can actually be more vulnerable now. So that itself was it gives me hope. Yeah, especially.
Fantastic. Dan, same question. What gives you hope?
In the spirit of being vulnerable, though, can I take a pause as a man with a large prostate and a small bladder and be right back?
Absolutely.
Give me like
yes.
That's real.
Look,
Gotta go.
All right, Dan, we got you back. Bladder intact. You good?
All better.
All right.
Not dancing in my seat here anymore.
All right. I'm gonna ask you that question again then. Dan, same question. What gives you hope about how the conversation around men's mental health is changing?
Big, I think the biggest thing that gives me hope is the fact we're actually having the conversation now. That's something that wouldn't happen years ago. And just to see leaders out there too talking about it. You see folks, athletes talking about it. You see entertainers talking about it. We have groups of men coming together to have those safe spaces. I think we still have a long way to go, but we've at least started the conversation and taken those first steps, and, gives us a chance to break those cycles. We really need to figure out a way to do something different, because what we've done in the past just hasn't really worked. So being willing and open to try something different, learning how to be vulnerable, which is hard sometimes, and just be in touch with all of our emotions, understanding that they're all an important part of who we are. I know for myself, sometimes even, when I haven't had a good cry in a while, I'll put on a song or something that I know hits me there, and just, so I can actually feel those emotions and they don't build up in a way that's negative and detrimental.
Yeah. So as we begin to wrap this up, and thank you so much for that, Dan. I'm curious if there's anything else that we have not talked about. I think for me, one of the things that I would want folks to take away from this conversation is, and speaking as a man, if a man ever confides in you, whether it's confiding in another man, whether it's confiding in your partner, whether it's confiding in your spouse, confiding in a person of the opposite sex, if a man confides in you that he's hurting or struggling mentally or emotionally, and if you either belittle him, degrade him, make him feel small, make him feel guilty, make him feel like less than a man for experiencing that, I can promise you he's not going to open up to you about his mental or emotional state again. And I would emphasize that what men really need is safe space. We don't need brave space. We don't need space to just be brave and man up and talk about our feelings, but we need a space that's safe, so that we're not going to be made to feel like we're less than a man for experiencing what we're experiencing, and especially for sharing it out loud. So I do want to make sure that people take that away. Is there anything else that any of you would like to share as a part of this conversation? And I would probably add to that, what do you hope that listeners will take away from this conversation?
Well, if I can, Vic, the one big thing I think that you can give it every day, right? And I've got it on the shirt right there. The world right now can just use so much more kindness. Think Absolutely. Of those kind things you can say instead of tearing somebody down, instead of going straight to the negative. You see it a lot on TV now, where everything is just an argument, instead of, finding that common ground and using this, whether it's mental health or suicide loss, as something that can unite us. We've all gone through it. We all experience it. And it can really be that common ground for us to build something and build unity instead of division.
Thank you. Great point. Eh Doji, let's go with you. Any final thoughts? Anything you want listeners to take away?
I would just say I feel like even though the youth in our generation is more aware, spaces like this, we don't take advantage of more. We don't. We hear all about it, and that, from peer to peer, we're more open to it now. However, we still don't take advantage of the spaces that we do have, or the organizations, or the resources that are there. We don't. We know about it, but we don't. And if, our generation could ease into that, taking advantage of, the people that are there, I think it would be better. Taking advantage of this resources that are there is one thing we need to focus on, because we're aware now, obviously, right? But, going past awareness, okay, let's use it now, is one thing that I would say we need to work on.
Anthony.
Yeah, to Dan's point, kindness, gratitude, empathy, and the perspective of understanding that we all have something. We all go through things. They say, about walking a mile in someone else's shoes. I'm very mindful of what that can often be like, and to Dan's point about the power of music. I'll share this. I mentioned earlier, you know, I enjoy playing guitar. Sometimes that playing guitar means playing along to music that kind of makes me move and exercise in different ways. So in terms of guitar, one of my favorite guitar players of all time is Eddie Van Halen. And there's a song, my favorite Van Halen song is Ain't Talking About Love. And there's a part in the song where the lead singer, David Lee Roth, says this line, and it always sticks with me. I've been to the edge, and then I stood and looked down. And so in the context of that line, I often wonder how many people have been in that moment, myself included, where, you know, I've been on the edge and I still look down, and understanding that what happens next is a choice. And depending where you are in terms of your faith, your patience, your perseverance, you never really know. So kindness, gratitude, empathy, and perspective are 4 pillars that, you know, I do my best every day to not only embody within myself, but in terms of my experiences, whether it be in business or in personal, because really, you know, it's, you know, a moment can change everything either way. And lead with kindness. Generally, you won't go wrong.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Gentlemen, thank you all 3 so much for being with me today for this conversation. Dan, Egan, Anthony, Tony, Gaddy, and Eh Doji, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. And thank you to our audience for being with us for this episode of Elevating Voices. And as always, you matter, your life matters, your pain matters. You are not alone. And above all else, we want you to be here tomorrow and every day after that. Thank you for joining me on Elevating Voices. If you're not familiar, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP, is America's leading suicide prevention organization and the largest private funder of suicide prevention research, with local chapters in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. AFSP offers education, law support, and advocacy programs and events nationwide, including the Out of the Darkness Walks. You can learn more about AFSP at afsp.org. If you or anyone you know is in distress, call or text 988 for free 24/7 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.